The Silent Sage of Cedar Grove. In a quaint town in the heart of America, Cedar Grove was a place where everyone knew each other. The streets were lined with maple trees, their leaves turning brilliant hues in the fall, and the local diner buzzed with the laughter and chatter of neighbors. Among the residents was an elderly man named Walter Grayson, a retired schoolteacher whose life had been devoted to imparting knowledge and wisdom to the younger generation. Walter had always been the town's unofficial sage. His stories, filled with lessons and laughter, captivated the children who gathered around him in the park. He was known for his knack for weaving tales that left lasting impressions. Yet as he entered his 80s, he found himself increasingly weary of the noise around him. The world had become a whirlwind of information and distraction, and Walter longed for a different kind of understanding. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun broke through the horizon, Walter decided that it was time for a change. Instead of heading to the park for his usual storytelling session, he chose to sit quietly on a bench overlooking the town's lake. He closed his eyes and listened to the gentle rustle of the leaves and the soft lapping of water against the shore. At first, his absence was noticeable. The children wandered around, confused, searching for their beloved teacher. They whispered among themselves, wondering where he had gone and why he hadn't shared his stories. As days turned into weeks, Walter continued to embrace silence, immersing himself in reflection. He began journaling, documenting his thoughts and the lessons he had learned over the years. During this time, the townspeople began to notice a shift in their own lives. With Walter's absence, they felt the void of his stories and the warmth of his presence. But rather than dwelling in sadness, they found themselves turning inward, inspired by his choice to seek solitude. Conversations in the diner slowed, and people began to take moments of silence reflecting on their own lives. One day, a young girl named Lily approached Walter at the lake. She was the most curious of his former students, with bright eyes and an inquisitive spirit. "Mr. Grayson, why don't you tell us stories anymore?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. Walter opened his eyes and smiled gently. "Lily, sometimes the best stories are the ones we tell ourselves when we listen closely to our hearts. I've found that in silence, we can discover truths that are often drowned out by the noise of the world." Lily thought for a moment. "But what if we want to hear your stories?" Walter nodded, understanding her desire for connection. "You are free to tell your own stories. Each of you has a narrative within that is waiting to be explored. You don't need me to teach you that." Inspired by Walter's words, Lily gathered her friends, and they began sharing their own tales, stories of their dreams, fears, and aspirations. They would meet by the lake, drawing inspiration from nature and the silence that enveloped them. As they spoke, they also learned to listen, to each other, and to themselves. As the seasons changed, Walter continued his quiet observance. He noticed how the townspeople began to engage in deeper conversations, sharing their struggles and triumphs. They formed bonds rooted in understanding, compassion, and the beauty of vulnerability. No longer reliant on Walter's stories, they found their voices, encouraged by the silence he had introduced. One chilly winter evening, the townspeople gathered for a community meeting in the town hall. The topic of discussion was how to keep the spirit of Cedar Grove alive in a rapidly changing world. Many voices rose, discussing the importance of connection and understanding, and in that room a familiar silence fell. A moment of reflection sparked by Walter's absence. Then, someone stood up and suggested, "Let's honor Mr. Grayson's gift to us by taking time for ourselves. Let's have a day of silence, each month, where we can reflect, listen, and grow. The proposal was met with enthusiasm. They decided to dedicate the first Saturday of each month to self-reflection and sharing what they had learned during their time of quiet. As word spread, neighboring towns began to take notice, intrigued by the idea of a community embracing the power of silence. In the spring, as flowers bloomed and life returned to Cedar Grove, Walter decided it was time to rejoin the community. He walked to the park, a gentle smile on his face, ready to see the transformation that had taken place. As he approached, he noticed the children, now young adults, engaged in animated discussions. They welcomed him back with open arms. "Mr. Grayson," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement, "you won't believe what we've been doing. We've been sharing our own stories and taking time for ourselves. You were right. There's so much to discover in silence." Walter felt a warmth spread through him. "I'm proud of each of you. Remember, it's not about how many stories you tell, but how deeply you listen, to yourself and to each other." From that day on, Cedar Grove became a place where silence and reflection were woven into the fabric of community life. Walter continued to mentor the younger generation, but now he encouraged them to find their own voices, fostering a culture of introspection and authenticity. Years later, when Walter passed away peacefully in his sleep, the town gathered to honor his memory. They shared their stories of how he had inspired them to focus on themselves and to embrace the power of silence. The legacy he left behind was not merely a collection of tales, but a vibrant community that thrived on understanding and self-discovery. Cedar Grove had transformed into a living testament to the importance of focusing on oneself, teaching generations to come that sometimes the most profound stories emerge in moments of quiet contemplation. And in the heart of it all, the spirit of Walter Grayson lived on, guiding them silently from within.